Hello, friends, and welcome. This is Syracuse Football Postgame presented by Kraus Health, the official healthcare partner of Syracuse Athletics. You got Brent Axe and you got Emily Leiker. You got a win for Syracuse to start off the 2024 season and Fran Brown's debut as head coach. The Orange take down Ohio 38-22. We got a lot to talk about from the game, from the day, from Fran Brown's debut. A lot of good things for Syracuse. Unfortunately, a couple of bad things that came out of this game, including a very noteworthy injury. It stinks that in game one last year, you had a significant injury. And that is the case once again for Syracuse football in game one this year. We've got some great thoughts from our Syracuse Sports Insiders to go over who were awesome today. And Emily, I know they saw you on the quad today. Emily's more CNY famous than me now, thanks to this here podcast and the Syracuse Sports Insider saying hello. Fantastic.
Yeah, it was great to see some people and chat. And it was, I was kind of caught off guard. I mean, I see people every now and then, but usually it taps out at like 2 per game. So to get 4 just walking in was kind of crazy.
Ooh, huge. Big time. So thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders for their great insight. You guys were sending me tailgating pictures from all over the country, from boats, from all sorts of places, and right here in Syracuse, New York. The rain did hold off for the quad walk, so we'll get into that a little bit later on in the show, and plenty of things from you guys, and perhaps a voicemail from the state of Florida that we will get to for you regular post-game show listeners who know who we're talking about there. Let's start with the injury, Emily, and then we'll get into the game itself. Marlowe Wax left the game. He couldn't put any pressure on his right foot. He ended up on crutches in the locker room, comes back out, was on the sideline standing on crutches afterwards. Fran Brown said in postgame that he thinks it's going to be a few weeks for Marlowe. He'll get evaluated tomorrow. Early read, Emily, some of the early things that I'm hearing about this. I'm not a doctor. I just play one on a podcast, but I would be very surprised if we see Marlo Wax back on the field in Fran's time frame of a few weeks. That looked to be a pretty serious injury, but let's let the doctors do their thing and figure it out here. So right after game one in 2024, just like in 2023, albeit on the opposite side of the ball, Emily, they've got a very, very big figure on this team to replace.
Yeah, I mean, Marlo Wax is at the center of this defense, like both literally and figuratively, right? Like he's right there in the middle at that linebacker position amidst this switch in scheme that has mixed things around for Syracuse. And then also like he's just the heart of the team on that side of the ball as well. And the heart of the entire team, one of those guys that everyone continuously rallies around. Obviously he came up learning from Michael Jones, who was that just a couple years ago for Syracuse. And so certainly to see that, it does not make you feel good. We saw him be helped off by his teammate and very close friend, Justin Barron, who those two made the decision to come back this year together. This was going to be their last year, and then they were going to go pro. And so, obviously we'll see probably Monday, maybe tomorrow we'll hear exactly how long this is going to be or what the early read on how long this is going to be. But certainly it's a tough break for Marlowe personally. It's a tough break for the team. The fact that he came back out not just in a boot, but also on crutches does not feel good at all to me. Like, it's not uncommon for us to see guys go into the locker room maybe on crutches, but then come out just back in the boot, because the boot does allow them to put some weight on a foot that maybe they couldn't at first. So to see him come out with the boot and the crutches and still really not be able to put any weight on that is certainly concerning. But we'll see. It's just a little bit of a sit and wait game until Monday, unless we can find something definitive out. But, Fran's been pretty open about injuries, so I would hope and expect that we hear something on Monday. They will have seen doctors by then and have a little bit better read. I don't think this is going to be a situation where we get drawn out on whether he's going to be around. And he's almost certainly, I think we can pretty comfortably say, he won't be around for Georgia Tech next week, just seeing how he came off the field.
Yeah, definitely not in that game. And again, we're not doctors here, so we'll see how it plays out. But that looked pretty serious. Fidel Diggs said that James Hurd came in and made some good plays in there. And there's yet another young guy who flashed in camp, who we knew was going to get on the field in some capacity, Emily. But that is a huge spot to fill. Darren McDonald is doing a great job on the other spot. You're in a 4-2-5 now. There's a lot of responsibility at that linebacker position, particularly Marlowe, Justin Barron's in kind of that star position now. He's looming all over the place in that defense, but a major injury for Syracuse, and we were wishing Marlowe nothing but the best and hope he gets back on the field this year. This is a guy that's got an NFL career to think about, and he's certainly means a lot to this team and means a lot to the fan base beyond what he does on the field. So we're wishing him the best for sure, and a great guy to talk to, and we hope everything goes well there, and we'll keep an eye on that situation going forward. Let's stay on the defensive side, Emily. I don't want to just start with a bunch of negatives here because this team did win in this game, but while we're talking about the defense, it factors into next week. The defensive line in particular, bit of an eyebrow raiser in this one because Ohio was able to run at will. In particularly, you had a running back who was a transfer into Ohio from Northwestern. We talk so much about Syracuse's transfers. Yeah, other schools get them too. Anthony Tyus III, 16 carries, 203 yards. He averaged 12.7 yards per carry, got in the end zone twice. Parker Navarro, their quarterback, had 33 yards on the ground, and Ricky Hunt Jr. with 20. All told, 255 rushing yards for Ohio. Emily, that was the big eyebrow raiser, I think, and the big concern that people have. It is only one game, but given how the defensive line added some guys, notably, Tank, they did lose a couple due to injury as well. And we came out of camp and there was a lot of oars on the depth chart, and that was probably the one position that we were still trying to figure out, but that's why they play the games. I did not expect Ohio to come in and push that defensive line around as much as they did. And you've got Georgia Tech next week, who prides itself on running the football. Brent Key, said it right after the Florida State win, run the ball. So all of a sudden, you got a big concern here, and Fran Brown acknowledged it after the game. He said that these guys have to get back to their training. They weren't hitting. They weren't doing, basically what that mentality was that was instilled in them to do it. But legit concern when you have an Ohio running back, mind you, a former Northwestern guy, but, for somebody to come in and push the Syracuse defensive line around like that was a big, big concern.
One thing I want to look back at that I'm kind of curious about is they were doing a lot of rotating on that line, particularly in the defensive tackle spot, but just overall. And that's because we saw on the depth chart on Monday, there were a lot of oars in there. And Fran said that was going to be something that they do all season, right? Like, you do have to have a rotation there to some degree to make sure that guys are getting breathers, that they can go full steam all game. He mentioned like different guys have different reps, that they're in shape enough to play. What I'm curious about though is they kind of shored up the run defense once they got inside the red zone. Like, they shut down Ohio in the red zone 4 times, and it just kind of looked completely different than their in-field defense. Now, schematically, a little bit of stuff changes there, and you approach those situations differently. Right. But I'm curious if maybe they kept those older players in and had them playing as a unit, that starting line of Diggs, Hastings, Wilson, Jaquez, and kept those guys in together on those reps instead of rotating them out. And maybe that's why that was a little more consistent there. And if that's the case, which again, I have to go back and look, I wasn't looking at that closely in game, then I'd be curious if we see less rotation moving forward. Again, you have to have some rotation at that defensive line, particularly in those interior spots on defensive tackle. But I think you can over-rotate there, and I think maybe that's what was happening a little bit today.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think they did over-rotate. There were times all 4 were going in and out, and it was almost like, let's see who's got what, and once they found out they were in trouble, now you're trying to find out, well, who's going to be the one that holds this thing up and stops Tyus from running the football as well as he did. I think you're going to see a big change there next week. They do want to keep these guys fresh. That didn't even work today, but in the third quarter, these guys were looking gassed. And you brought up an interesting point, Emily. 2 things on that. A lot of our Syracuse Sports Insiders were saying there was a little bit of holding going on in some of those situations where Ohio broke through. I mean, SU fans complaining about refs. Stop me if you heard that one before. And they were MAC officials out there today. But here's the other thing. Why did Ohio throw the ball so much in the red zone? They're shredding Syracuse apart in the red zone, and they're throwing the ball, which, hey, Syracuse took it, and Devin Grant made some great plays. Fidel made some great plays in there. Deuce Chestnut made a huge play. So the red zone defense held up, and that was huge for Syracuse, and it's something that's going to obviously have to be the case next week against Georgia Tech. So they did, as a couple players put it, bend but don't break in that situation. But I think Ohio did give them a little bit of help there with some questionable play calling in that sense too. So that was a concern. Certainly coming out of this game. And I think Emily made a great point. I don't think we're going to see over-rotating next week. I think you kind of decide who's going to be in there, and you rotate when needed based on, when guys are gassed a little bit. Now we're almost 12 minutes into this thing. We have not said the name Kyle McCord yet, and we really need to. The best quote came from Fran Brown when he said he wants to send Ohio State coach Ryan Day a bottle of champagne for letting Kyle McCord essentially come here. Emily, what we saw tonight is why Fran Brown got on a plane, flew to Columbus almost the minute the portal opened, and got some local boosters to pony up the money to bring in Kyle McCord. 354 yards. He would have had more. There was a 44-yard completion to Oronde, which was called back due to a penalty. That would have actually put McCord in the top 10 all-time Syracuse individual game performances. It was a career high for him anyway at 354 yards, 4 touchdowns. It's everything we thought Kyle McCord would be, Emily. He was in command of the offense. He took what the defense gave him. He found 2 primary receivers who we'll talk about here. It was a shaky start. Don't get me wrong. That first quarter was pretty ugly for Syracuse. Ohio had the ball for almost 14 minutes in the first quarter, so they had to get the kinks out. But once they did, that's why you brought in Kyle McCord. We saw it tonight at the Dome for sure.
Yeah, the first drive did have us looking over at each other, being like, "Oh no, did we drink some Kool-Aid? Like, did we get caught up?" And then everyone settled down and things went on from there. I think the big thing is the next drive, right? They start out with LeQuint running the ball for a couple downs, which is a pretty safe, a pretty standard like drive approach. Like first, second, rush it, run it, or pass it if you have to on third. Go from there, build up. Having Kyle throw it right out the gate was a little bit of like I can't believe they're doing this. But obviously it all settled down. And, I think a big thing too was the receivers we've talked all about, both the receivers in the tight end core and the receivers in the receiving room. The two I really pulled out and wrote about already, and you can read it on syracuse.com, is Oronde Gadsden and Trebor Pena, who are the two guys back from injury. We heard multiple times last year, like these two guys, like, basically broke our football team by being out all year. Like we were expecting them to be the guys on this team, and now they're not here and we can't function. And we saw tonight why that's the case. Like we knew it for Gadsden, right?
Yeah. We
were aware of Gadsden's talent. That 2022 season, he has an incredible year. Pena, we had seen a little bit from, but really not that much for me to have just been like, oh, this is a really big loss. Like it took a couple people in the program being like, no, Trebor being out is a big deal for me to be like, oh, okay, like let's see what happens moving forward. And both of them today, were incredible. Combined for 4 touchdowns. Trebor had 2 through the air receiving, and then 1 on the ground. Oronde had his that was very reminiscent of his Purdue touchdown where he came up that left sideline and across in the end zone. And of course, now you have the student section down there. So there were a little nerves from Gadsden, at least. Like I talked to him post game and he acknowledged that. Like he's like, yeah, I went in and I was a little scared. I was shaking. I had to get that first hit back in and feel myself being okay back out on the field. But yeah, those two guys shown, and then they had, I think, 6 other receivers that all caught passes today. And that's what you want, is you want a spread, a wide array of targets that McCord can hit.
It looked like McCord had been in sync with OG and Pena in particular for 9 years, not 9 months. And it showed you the work that they put in, the offseason. You just think about how things would be different, okay, if OG and Pena were in that offense last year. Like, ultimately, I still think a coaching change had to be made. But what if they win 1 or 2 more games with those guys in the offense, which isn't that crazy a thought to put out there? Would we be talking about an entirely different situation right now, that things happen the way that they did and we're not? But that one throw that McCord, you mentioned both of Pena's touchdowns were kind of in that left corner of the end zone. McCord made one throw to Pena, if you've seen the highlights, and of course, if you watch the game, that was right on the money, just in sync, right there. And I'm thinking to myself, these guys have known each other for like 9 months, and you're making throws like that to somebody, which shows you McCord's talent and how in sync that they are. And how, shout out to Trevor's mom, by the way, who I saw on the quad today, and she tweets a lot, and she's fantastic, and had a nice conversation with her. How happy were they, though? I mean, I did predict a Syracuse receiver to have 3 touchdowns today, Emily. It was not Pena, it was OG, but he found, and Pena also had a nice touchdown this on the other end of the dome, and on 4th down, my guy, Yasin Willis, had 3 cracks at the end zone. I think they jobbed him a touchdown. I think he got the ball over the goal line, but that's neither here nor there at this point. But Pena is a weapon. He's an escape hatch, right? You've got some, you got OG. Zeed Haynes made a great 42-yard catch today. Actually had to leave the game for a little bit. He took a big shot, but came back. Right. Jackson Meeks made a great catch out there today. He had to stretch out for it. It was a catchable ball, but, it showed you again the connection that's already there with McCord. But, man, you wrote about it and hit the nail on the head, and everybody just saw it. And all it took was one game to be like, yeah, those guys, if they were around last year, could have been a whole different story. But you saw McCord's core 4 in this game. They all had big catches, and those are the 4 he's going to be looking for here, which, some people are like, as you mentioned, Emily, where was Villari and a couple other things? It's like, man, this is a good problem to have for Kyle McCord, to be honest with you.
I was going to say, let's pause on Villari for a second, because so many people were tweeting at me, where's Villari? Is Villari that I literally was like, did I completely miss something in this game? Like, did we all miss Villari being out or something?
No, he is out there. Yeah.
No, he was out there. This is what comes when you have a lot of people you can use on your football team. Dan Villari is a good football player. There are a lot of good football players on this team now. And the reason, we all got accustomed to hearing Dan's name so much last year, because at the end of the year, he was one of the only people on offense they could rely upon besides LeQuint.
He was the offense, basically, along with LeQuint, as you said. Yeah,
he was doing all that stuff. Prior to that, he had a couple catches, I think, in the Clemson game, a big breakaway there. I remember where he trucked some people over, but it really wasn't until late in the season when he became necessary that Dan really got that step up. And again, Dan is a good football player, and I'm sure we are going to see him throughout this year. But I'll level with you guys, we're not going to see him as much as you apparently all were thinking that we were going to today. He played 25 snaps per Pro Football Focus. They already have their game snaps up. That was 20 in line and 4 out in the slot. We'll see him, but there's so many tight ends in that room this year. If you want to see OG, you're going to see less Dan naturally. And then there's all the receivers as well. So, we will see Dan. But don't be thinking that we're going to hear Dan's name every single play call or repeatedly on offense every single game.
And it wasn't just, Villari as much. And I understand why people thought about that. But Emily made a great point in who's back, where the targets are. McCord's got to make a decision in, less than 2 seconds sometimes about where the ball's going to go. And maybe Villari's just not that choice. I had somebody text me and be like, can we just get the ball to Max Mang? I want to see what that looks like. It's like, if you're getting the ball to Max Mang, no offense to young Max, you've got some problems out there on offense. Something went wrong if he's getting, or it's a trick play, right? So it is a good problem to have. But even Omari Hatcher and Darrell Gill Jr., limited in what they got. They both had, I'll look at the numbers while we're yapping about it here and who got
each had one catch for 8 yards.
So they each had one catch. So look, there's going to be some games OG, people figure out at least how to cut him off, and he doesn't have 7 catches for 108 yards. I think someone's going to figure out Pena, right? There's going to be games where Meeks isn't open. Zeed Haynes had to leave this game for a little bit with an injury. So everybody kind of moves up the totem pole, if you will, when that happens. But this is a good problem to have. And I think Dan Villari would be the first person to tell you that, by the way.
Right. He would.
Couple other things, Emily. Penalties reared their ugly head again. You're not going to fix this problem in one game. But the biggest problem that Fran Brown has to fix from last year is discipline. Now, you can talk me into that running into the kicker, giving that guy an Emmy Award. You can talk me into that. What you can't talk me into is Justin Barron had 2 bad penalties, which is kind of surprising for a fifth-year senior. We didn't get a chance to ask him about it afterwards. I'm sure he certainly was his own worst critic on that. And he had some defensive penalties that just gave Ohio second chances, right? So those things have to be cut out, and it's one game, so we'll see how that goes. But I'll give you a positive in one thing that we saw in this game that we would never see under Dino Babers. Syracuse gets the ball back with 49 seconds to go in the second half. And last year, what would we be thinking, Emily? When are they taking the knee? Or how are they going to screw this up? Instead,
right on the clock.
they went right down the field and scored. At the very least, would have put a field goal on the board. So big difference there in how aggressive Fran Brown got. Fourth down play that I brought up earlier. Same thing. Didn't think about it, went for it. He's mentioned that he's been reading that CAI book, and he's had a lot of that on his mind. Fran admitting he was nervous going into the game. He was worried about, and I appreciate his honesty on that, by the way. That was one thing he was concerned about, Emily, was clock management. As a first-time head coach, like, he's never done it before and had to jump right into the pool, and he passed the test in game 1. I'll give him that.
Yeah, I mean, that drive really came as close to perfectly executed as it could be. I think there were maybe like 2 passes that went incomplete there, but you hit OG right away and then hit OG again, and then I think you hit OG one more time is what happened. Yeah. And then Meeks, and you see Meeks run to pick up the ball and go give it to the ref, which is good coaching. Like, you're supposed to go do that. Like, make sure you're staying on top of the clock. And then they close out that drive with that brilliant pass to Trebor. That was pretty tight coverage, or not tight coverage, but he was tight there on the edge. And McCord really had to drop it in kind of over his head. And so, yeah, just to see that. And they finished that with still 5 seconds on the clock. Like, Ohio had to come out and still take a knee to kill the half. So that was just, it was like watching an entirely different sport, Brent.
It really was. Like, you do that in football? You don't have a coach that can't figure these things out and screw up timeouts? And it's like, that was refreshing, was the word, to see that. You know what else was refreshing, Emily? The shots of OJ on the sideline. So if you didn't see this, guys, Fran Brown was talking about this on his radio show. He was looking for ways his defense could celebrate turnovers. And we see this in college football now. The most famous one is the drip chain, of course. But other schools have different ways to kind of celebrate turnovers on the sideline. And there's the guys that had the basketball dunking hoop, and I'm forgetting some other ones here. But Syracuse, at least now, we'll see how this evolves. So James Hurd had the turnover and comes to the sideline, and the little red solo cups were there, taking shots at OJ.
I'm bummed I missed it. I'm looking through our photo gallery to see if there was a photo of it in there.
That's why we have, shout out to our excellent photographers, but our Syracuse Sports Insiders as well, who were letting us know what was going down on the sideline there. So that was fun. Other things from the day, I thought the quad walk could not have gone better after, the dress rehearsal in spring was not exactly what Fran was looking for, but that's what a spring practice and spring game is. It's a rehearsal. The band was there. The rain held off on a day where it was raining on and off in central New York. Quad walk was amazing. And the biggest comment I heard from that, Emily, I don't know about you, everybody's like, damn, they look good. Yeah, they had the coordinated suits walking through there, so that the pregame atmosphere was, I expected a little buzz and a little anticipation given everything that's gone on the last 9 months, but boy, they could not have executed that any better. And I know Fran was pretty happy about that too.
Yeah, I'll tease that Chris Carlson has a story coming tomorrow morning that highlights a lot of the kind of new tradition type things that we saw happen today and how those worked out, and just some of the highlights of Fran Brown's first game day. And one of them includes a little bit of backstory on their matching suits, which came from Mr. Shop downtown. And he got some detail about the details of the suit and how they all came to be. So be sure to look out for that in the morning.
We sure will. All right. Our Syracuse Sports Insiders, man, you guys were awesome during the game. Mentioned sending me pictures from tailgates, things you saw on the sideline. A few of you spotted Marlo Wax and crutches. Here's a picture of that. Like, always appreciate you guys keeping an eye out on things for us and your great questions and comments throughout the game. And I want to highlight a few that you guys had in mind here for post game. Start with TK, who says, I agree with all the players' comments that Pena must be thrilled to be back and playing with a refined quarterback such as McCord. Mike P says, feels like it's going to be a weird year from what we've been used to, where the offense is stronger relatively than our defense. We'll see if that balances out.
Yeah.
As we go through, Emily. Yeah.
I don't think we should put too much stock in just one performance of, one side of the ball was much better than the others. Like, this was basically exactly how I think we could have gone from like a vague prediction standpoint of like Fran Brown's first game as head coach, right? You're bringing in a roster that has 40 plus new players on it, a bunch of whom are on the field, a coaching staff that has never coached a game together. Like, things were bound to happen in this game, and they did. McCord was almost picked off twice, and then he was picked off later in the game, and missed tackles I see coming up in the comments, and I saw Derek McDonald and Fadil Diggs literally run into each other on an early play. Like, that stuff was just bound to happen. Now, if it continues to happen moving forward, that's when you get concerned. And obviously, it's a little bit of an interesting stretch going straight into Georgia Tech, which is a very strong football team from here. It's not like previous years where you get a couple opponents that you're expecting to blow through right off the bat, and you can kind of maybe gauge, okay, like these are very similar. Like, we can see, okay, they progressed from Western Michigan or from Colgate to Western Michigan last year. Like, we're not going to get exactly that, but I would level out on some of the defense looks horrible commentary that did seem to pop up from somewhat this year or today.
This is why coaches always say you make your biggest improvement between game 1 and game 2, because you got to get that stuff out of the way. There's no preseason football in college football. Like you said, knocking into each other and not knowing where to be and shifting around over subbing defenses. And, is this here glass, go Bills, half full or half empty? In the sense of, well, you had a guy go out there and really prepare you for what Georgia Tech's going to throw at you next week. Or is it they couldn't stop that guy? So how you going to stop Georgia Tech, right? That's the great questions that get answered in these sports. We knew Georgia Tech was going to be a tough week 2 ACC opponent as it is, and they have a pretty darn good quarterback too. Let's not forget, guys. And while we're yapping here, latest, now Georgia Tech's playing Georgia State. That game is in the fourth quarter, and Georgia Tech's up 35-12, and they have 157 yards on the ground. So, yeah, they're doing Georgia Tech things as we speak. They're going to want to run the ball down Syracuse's throat next week, no doubt about it. As Bert notes here, can't give up 255 yards rushing and 39 carries to Ohio. Now I'm really worried about Georgia Tech. Matt says, Fran mentioned the nerves on the broadcast just before kickoff. Him being that honest about that is refreshing and speaks to who he is. Yeah, I think he said he had to call his wife a few times before the game, had to make her run to the bathroom. But then he said, and we think we know who this is, but we're going to confirm it just to figure it out. What settled him down was he saw an old Little League coach. Mm-hmm. Emily, you did a lot of research, of course, into the great Fran Brown profile that you wrote and how much certain people in his life meant a lot to him. So if it's the coach we think that it is, it'd be interesting if like that was the moment that centered him. It's like, okay, let's do this thing. I'm ready. Fran admitted too that he's got to have a little more composure on the field, just into it with the players, yelling at the refs, that kind of thing. So it could, like we were saying with the players, Fran had to get a lot of this stuff out of his system and be like, oh man, that's not going to work as the head coach. I gotta figure this stuff out. But you can only do it by throwing on the headset and going out there and actually coaching a game, which he had not done to this point as a head coach, of course.
Right. And none of this is to excuse mistakes that were made. Like, right. Like you shouldn't be getting a roughing the kicker penalty or that holding penalty. And like, regardless of whether they looked like they should have actually stood or not, you shouldn't right, be letting a MAC team maybe run over you quite as much. It's not to excuse it, but it's just to bring some explanation to the fact that, like, or like not an explanation, but a reminder, because I think people do know and they just need to be kind of reminded about it, that this is there's a lot of change going on this team, and not everything was going to be perfect in week 1. And again, if they come out against Georgia Tech and Georgia Tech puts up like 400 rushing yards or something crazy like that, God forbid, I'll be the first one on here being like, they got to revamp the running defense. Like,
Well,
something's got to change.
this is the thing with a football schedule. You don't always get teams when it's convenient for you to play certain teams.
Right.
But you saw a run heavy team in week 1. You make the adjustments. And see, before, Emily, it used to be you can know what's coming, but if you don't have the horses to stop it, it doesn't matter. I think they do have the horses on that defensive line to stop it, at least more horses than we've seen before, more size and players that can do it. I think that was the biggest surprise. I've seen Syracuse defenses get run over in recent years, and frankly, they just didn't have the guys to stop certain teams. They have those horses now, but what you said makes sense, and something we all have to keep in mind. They're getting their legs under them here. This was their first game. But if that didn't wake you up to what Georgia Tech's going to do next week, then, man, I don't know what would.
Right.
Edenor Syracuse says 3 things to work on. Obviously, the run defense. The not so obvious, place kicking. PATs and field goal looked a little shaky. And he said his third thing is the passing game looks great, but we need to establish our own run game, a.k.a. run Yassine the Beast Willis more. Emily, if there's somebody on this planet that likes Yassine more than I, it is Ed, who is a big Yassine fan. He got out there, goal line situation, perfect scenario for him. Again, I think that third down and goal run, I think the ball got over the goal line. Just saying, but we're going to see plenty more of Yassine in that situation. Will Nixon got in there, and we haven't even talked about LaQuint Allen. Shame on us. LaQuint, 98 yards on the ground. He had an awesome touchdown catch, a one-handed stretch out catch. He came off the field briefly, just, literally had to walk it off at an ankle situation, but he was right back out there a couple plays later. What I love to see tonight, I know LaQuint can run the ball. His passing game, I think, has really improved from last year to this year. I think I could say that just after one game. I think as if they don't have enough targets out there receiving, as we brought up earlier. There's LaQuint, who can kind of, trail through and get open if you're paying too much attention to those other targets that we mentioned.
Right, yeah. He had 4 catches on 5 targets for 24 yards and 16 yards after catch, which obviously is where throwing to a running back comes in handy, is those guys tend to be a little more used to trucking guys over and getting those yards after contact. So, yeah, I thought LaQuint looked great in the receiving game and what he was able to do, having McCord connect with him. Just shy of that 100-yard rushing mark. We know that Fran set an ambitious goal for him of 1,500 rushing yards this season. So we'll see if he can get there. But yeah, a solid outing. 15 carries, 30 total rushing attempts by Syracuse. So we'll see if they lean on that more heavily. That's like one of those things that I think could definitely change week to week too, right? Like some weeks you just lean naturally more towards your run game than you do your pass game. But yeah.
Emily, I enjoy getting texts from this gentleman, but it's just not the same. I need to hear the text.
I'm so excited.
Let's call him out, going to the bullpen. Ladies and gentlemen, what did Rockin' Ron think about this one?
Hey, Brett and Emily, Rockin' Ron in Florida. I thought I was watching Dino Babers' game again here. Yeah, defensive line's got a lot of work. No one was setting the edge so the linebackers could come up. Help. And, but I will say, Diggs had an off game, never mentioned it, but I think he had 3.5 sacks. We haven't had that in a long time here. Thank God the offense pulled us out. We have a lot of firepower on there. But I thought McCord was going to gas him so much that I saw triple teaming him. Then he finally opened up to the other receivers, and we have a lot of talent out there. They look good. And they'll be keeping us in a lot of games, so I'm looking forward to that. But I'm sure Babers is looking back at this and go, man. But anyways, I was a little ticked off at that wasted time out because of the kickoff. I'm sure Coach is going to be upset on that too. So,
yeah.
Anyways, last thing I have to say for now, this week, that targeting call was one of the worst non-called targets I've seen, I think forever. That was definitely targeting. So I wouldn't want to be the defensive front line this week under Robinson practicing, but got a lot of work to do, and we'll go from there. So until next week, out of the bullpen to you, my friend. Later.
The legend, Rockin' Ron. Fidel Diggs had 2 sacks, but he did have 4 tackles for loss.
Mm-hmm.
So he was in the backfield there, and great comment about Coach Robinson. Yeah, I think he's going to be on his defensive line, making some adjustments this week. And yeah, I thought about Dino Babers a couple times today and things that, frankly, we didn't see in this game that we would have seen under Babers and vice versa, and how we're taking a step forward there. And, we should have played that at the beginning and just called it a night. I think he wrapped it up pretty beautifully there, Emily.
That was a good summary. Rockin' Ron, he gets it. He knows, and he listens to us enough that he knows our rhythm, just as we know his rhythm of how he's going to deliver his messages. So thank you for calling in, Ron.
Ronnie, we appreciate it, my friend. Everybody's like, well, how do I leave voicemails? Maybe our Syracuse Sports Insiders, if you feel that's hard to live up to. But I'll drop you that voicemail number if just give me a little wink, and I'll.
We had some good ones last year.
We did, yes, we did. So
I think it's a lot easier to leave impassioned voicemails when you're angry, though. Like I'd love.
Be careful.
I'd love to hear like a really impassioned, excited phone call. So,
I would have loved after the first quarter what they would have sounded like. I saw the texts, so what they would have sounded like it would have been very interesting to ride the wave of emotions in football. So let Uncle Brent know on the text if you guys want the voicemail line. Maybe I'll hook you up with that. Rock and Ron, ladies and gentlemen. A great way to end our first post-game podcast. Emily, great job at the Dome tonight and through the week leading up here. And we'll be keeping you up to date on Georgia Tech coming up, the latest on the Marlo Wax injury and everything you're going to need to know Syracuse football-wise. Great to see so many of you out there, but let's keep seeing you. There's 4 straight home games to start the season. I wonder how the crowd's going to pick up and what the energy is going to be like for what is a big ACC matchup between Syracuse and Georgia Tech. That's a noon kick next week. We'll be here for post-game next Saturday afternoon, but a couple great podcasts lined up this week. So please subscribe to Syracuse Sports if you haven't already. Become a Syracuse Sports Insider if you haven't already. And the easiest way to do that is to text the word orange to 315-847-3895. You text me, I text you. I do send a text that all of you get, but it's not a group text. If you're not a big fan of group text like me, we love our Syracuse Sports Insiders, and the community is growing here, and no better time than with the season starting to hop on board. For Emily Leiker, I'm Brent Axe. Thanks to Krause Health, the exclusive healthcare provider for Syracuse Athletics. We will talk to you next time, guys. Syracuse beats Ohio. It starts the Fran Brown era off with a 38-20.